Hi, everybody. This is Stephanie Francisco. I'm Communications Director with Conservation Alabama. We're back for another Conservation Q&A video chat. And today we are taking a minute to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which hit the Gulf Coast April 20th, 2010. And to talk about that with me is Callaway. She is Executive Director and Baykeeper with Mobile Baykeeper. She's joining us from her beautiful front porch in Mobile. Casi, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be with you and talk to you about these issues.
Right. So for folks who aren't familiar with Baykeeper, could you tell us a little bit about the organization and then also about your role sort of as the hybrid executive director and Baykeeper?
Sure. Mobile Baykeeper started in 1997 to fight one chemical plant going up on the western shore of Mobile Bay. We've been through some fun name changes in our history. We were West Bay Watch. Then we finally, when I joined the team in 1998, we expanded the organization's reach to be all of Mobile Bay and became Mobile Bay Watch. And then in 99, we joined forces with Waterkeeper Alliance and we became Mobile Baykeeper. We work now statewide across the whole Mobile Bay watershed. And we work on those issues that really affect our air, our water, and people. Our kind of tagline is clean water, clean air, and healthy communities. As the executive director Baykeeper, that means I drive the conversation on how do we speak up and speak for Mobile Bay. We are the advocate for our waterways and for our watershed, and that's an important role that waterkeepers play. And we work to make sure that it's kind of to put a human face on what we care so much about. All of us across coastal Alabama live, eat, and breathe our waterways. 5,000 miles of shoreline in 2 coastal counties. So it's present and prevalent as a part of our lives, our economy, our quality of life. So we work really hard to protect it. And speaking up and advocating for Mobile Bay is where that is. The executive director part's the business part. That's me running the show and making sure we've got a great team with the supplies and tools and everything else that they need. And right now, great Wi-Fi for remote access to our work.
Who knew that was so important?
Right.
Well, I know the oil spill impacted Baykeeper's work a lot, and so I wanted to talk to you about that. Can you tell me about your memories of that specific day? What was your day like on April 20th, 2010?
On April 20th, 2010, I'm pretty sure we were doing Earth Day activities that week. We were focused on everything else. Earth, April is Earth Month, and all month long, we environmental advocates work to make sure everybody knows what's happening environmentally. We work to get people engaged in our work. It's the time for the best and broadest education. So I knew that a rig had exploded in the Gulf. It probably wasn't until the 21st or even 22nd that I knew that 11 people's lives were lost. And then a few days after that, realizing that maybe they hadn't actually plugged up the hole in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico that they had punched. But it was I would say it was a full 7 days, maybe even 8, before we knew that oil disaster was going to be our oil disaster. I got a call from the acting ADEM director, Alabama Department of Environmental Management director, and he and I were friends, so it wasn't an unusual thing to get a phone call from him. But he immediately talked to me about the spill, and then he went into that, don't worry about it. It's nothing. It's like 1 micron. That's like a hair on the top of the Gulf of Mexico. And he talked about swimming pools and the kind of language that people use to hide. And so I got my hackles up and my worries up. But then a couple of days later, they decided to burn the oil in the Gulf of Mexico, and here was a code orange ozone alert day.
Wow.
So that's when you knew it was air issue. That's when we knew it was a water issue, and very much when we all knew it was our issue. Still not knowing how big, but we knew it was going to affect coastal Alabama that day.
And when would you say you realized that this was going to be a life-changing event, not just for you and for your organization, but for the entire coastline?
So that was a Wednesday. It was a Wednesday morning, and my godson has asthma. So I'd already sent my best friend a note that said, it's a code orange ozone alert day. Keep Alan inside, take care of him. And then the next thing I saw was burning the oil in the Gulf of Mexico. So the next thing I did was send an email to our water keepers. Kind of a beautiful thing that we have in we have as part of Waterkeeper Alliance is this family of people who can help us be smart. I will also tell you, so that was probably Thursday, and I get this note back. I get phone calls back from Alaska, from my friend Bob Shavelson, who is the Cook Inlet keeper who went through Exxon Valdez. And Bob said, whatever they tell you, it's 5 times worse.
Wow.
So they had already said it was 5,000 gallons a day coming out of the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. So that's 25,000. And then that next day they said it was 25,000, and the numbers just kept increasing. And then I also have to say that on that Thursday, Tammy Harrington, your executive director, then our deputy director, then our outreach and education coordinator, who quickly became our deputy director during this crisis. She had gone for girls' weekend, and worst thing in the whole wide world, I had to call her back from it. I don't even think I called. I think her husband did. And I think she came, or she just knew. I mean, Tammy knew that we were all hands on deck by that Friday. And that's the May 1st was the first big weekend for all of us. I think that Saturday morning, a car showed up on my front porch and said, I'm taking you to a live interview on CNN. That's something I'd never done before, as you can imagine. And from that moment on, it was a roller coaster. And we all, anyone who did the work that I do was across the whole Gulf Coast was on high, full go. We probably all worked in the 20-hour-a-day range. We slept very little. We had thousands of emails from people with everything from offers of help to offers of solutions to hair booms, some crazy ideas, some wonderful ideas but just pure love as well. And it was a scary, scary time, and it lasted well beyond the 87 days that it took to actually cap the well, which I think is something people don't realize. I think for both me and Tammy and Conservation Alabama, we maybe stopped working on this every single week about a year ago. So, I mean, I still tag into it monthly. I think maybe 2 years ago, it was daily. So now we're finally at a place where it's not that frequent, but having this new crisis on top of that, I little PSD, little flashbacks of how all of it worked and what all of it did for what all we had to face, and really truly understanding what our new frontline folks are dealing with this new global disaster.
Well, as the executive director, obviously you had to navigate this, not only in terms of your organization's response, but changing your organization to be able to respond. So how would you say, how different is Mobile Baykeeper today than it was right before the oil spill?
Well, I think we've changed a lot, but I think Mobile Baykeeper, has always been a fairly resilient organization. I think the reason I've lasted 22 years with the organization is because it changes. We get a new campaign or a new issue, and we pivot, we learn, we research, we dig into that issue, we start to own that issue, and then we figure out how to solve it. So we've done that over time regularly. I would say a major road project with Highway 98, and we had to learn everything there is to know about stormwater. And steeps and slopes and erosion, and what's the right path for a road, and what's the National Environmental Policy Act, and how does it impact roads. We did it with liquefied natural gas in around 2005. And then Katrina on top of that. We had the BP oil disaster in 10, and then, you know, now we're facing coal ash and Alabama Power, which is, you know, someone we've worked with historically to solve problems really easily, and now we're in a major battle with that. We were a staff then of 4 full-time people, and we had 2 AmeriCorps members at Baykeeper in 2010. We had a great team, and we had great members and a great board. We were due to present to our board our strategic plan on the first week in May. So we were actually fully in planning mode organizationally. We've been working on that for 4 months. So we knew how to plan. We knew what we wanted to do. We had dug into what are our strengths and our weaknesses and our opportunities. Now, a BP oil disaster, you know, 200 million gallons of oil spilled across the Gulf of Mexico. Not one of the threats we had anticipated. Shocking. So, but what we were able to do is really pivot and rewrite what our plan was and do it quickly. And so we refocused our energies on dealing with the disaster at hand. So one of the big things we realized is that Alabama had not actually planned for a disaster on water coming onto land. Everything we had from that perspective was a land disaster hitting water. So they were trying to put boom in the Delta, which is, you know, 50 miles away from the Gulf of Mexico, and not putting boom around Marsh Island and around Coffee Island, or these, you know, bird and turtle and shrimp nesting grounds. So we had to teach them to change that whole process. That was a big piece of what we did. We also looked at restoration. How are we going to spend these money? How are we going to prepare? How are we going to protect ourselves? How are we going to assess the damage when we don't really have good baseline data to start with? So that was our big second. And then the number 3, and this number 3 has carried forward with us all the way through, and that's do not let the lesson be lost. We have focused on making sure that people understand the impact of any kind of environmental disaster on our economy, our community, and our quality of life. I think, you know, Katrina for me changed me with the economy and the economy and the environment. I got it that if we didn't if you don't invest in your environment, you're going to see a negative impact on your economy. And those economies that are the strongest all have a strong basis on environmental protection. Those two go hand in glove. So I had seen it, we've been preaching it for sure, but it was the first time that I think Alabama got that. It was one summer lost, and it was $1 billion economic hit to the state's budget. The state's budget, that's not talking about Gulf Shores or Orange Beach or Dauphin Island. That economic hit was dramatic. And it was not because the economy tanked. It was because the environment was massively impacted.
That's a huge lesson to learn. And I think, you know, you brought up the point that we didn't have a ton of baseline data, and that always surprised me when I was researching the oil spill. You know, you talk to people from Chesapeake Bay and they would say, look, we have like 150 years of data on Chesapeake Bay, and it's a much smaller area. And there's just historic data as much as you would ever want. So I think that's one of the things, it's sort of hard to look at 10 years out and see, have we solved problems because we didn't really know where we were to start with. But I mean, with the information we have, what do you think about the state and federal response to the oil spill now that we've had a decade to put some of those things in place?
I think I would give us a C, I guess. I think that one of the biggest things we have not done is we've not continued forward with data collection. We don't have lines of funding that are solely and specifically dedicated to knowing what is happening, where we are with every inch of Mobile Bay and our 56 miles of beachfront property. We're not continuing to collect the same kind of data that we know we needed when this disaster happened.
Mm-hmm.
I think a second thing is we changed the rules on how we protect ourselves against an oil disaster for about 5 minutes. And we have already started to undo those rules. And that's not just at the state level, very much that's happening at the federal level with new rules undone, yesterday. What we also see though is at the local and state level, we can do more. We know what these economic hits are for us. And we've got an agency that is turning a complete and utter blind eye to the connection between the economy and our community and our environment. Mm-hmm. And there is nothing more dangerous. We are solely setting ourselves up to do this again.
Mm-hmm. That is scary. And this is a hard question to answer, but how long do you see the Gulf Coast and Alabama's coast in particular having to deal with the impacts of the oil spill?
I think that if we focus, it's all about the testing. So how many more bird species are we losing? How many more turtle species are we losing? What else is happening in the Gulf? And there's some good scientific data about that's happening now. And with Exxon Valdez, it took 20 years for some of the fish species to drop out completely. Now, we hope and pray that is not what happens in the Gulf of Mexico. It's, again, much larger body of water, much more resilient. We've been spilling the oil into the Gulf for decades, or for hundreds of years, maybe even from natural seeps. And then we created a whole bunch more natural seeps by poking holes in it all over the place. Mm-hmm. No longer natural. But we are, what are we continuing to do to the Gulf of Mexico? Are we killing it with death by 1,000 cuts? The BP oil disaster was a gash. It was a giant gaping wound. But we still continue to dump oil and gas and grease and pollution and red clay into our rivers every day from stormwater runoff. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to say if this disaster is going to be the nexus for all problems we ever have in the Gulf, but there's an absolute opportunity to make it the nexus for changing how we treat the Gulf of Mexico. Mm-hmm. And that's what I hope this 10th anniversary of the BP oil disaster helps people look at again. I want people to remember what we lived through. Mm-hmm. And how none of us thought we were going to survive it. And none of us thought we were going to come out of it with shrimp that we could eat and enjoy and love, and with oysters and with fish and with clean beaches and beautiful sugar sand that was not coated in oil. Mm-hmm. I want people to sit for a minute with that. Remember what it felt like, that thought of that extreme loss. Mm-hmm. And let's guard ourselves against it. Let's invest in never letting that happen to us.
That's a great lead in to my last question. Obviously, we're in the middle of a global disaster right now, and this is another paradigm shifting event. We're going to see changes to the world that we could have never anticipated as a result of this virus. Having lived through something that changed so many elements of your community and your work, do you have any advice for people who are struggling with this uncertainty and the fear? How do you stay resilient in the face of something so scary?
Well, that is one day at a time is how you stay resilient to it. And I'm not kidding, because I spent the first at least 2 weeks not sleeping of this pandemic, mm-hmm. Not sleeping. And it feels very, because it feels very, I remember, I can still feel it. Mm-hmm. I can feel what our lives were like 10 years ago. And, and again, I'm doing a whole lot more executive directoring than I am baykeeping now, because I've got a team of 18 people now who are worried. who are scared. And my job is to care for them and to make sure they have a job tomorrow and to keep them, you know, to keep the organization floating as things are changing for us with events and fundraising and everything else. So I'm doing a lot more caretaking of my team. And I think that for those on the front line, you've got to practice self-care. I think Tammy and I both will tell you, I don't think we ate until Carol Hunter from Downtown Mobile Alliance said, please let me help you. And I said, feed us. And then every day she organized some restaurant to bring food to the Baykeeper office. And that was the first time I ate between probably 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. In more than a week. So take care of each other. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and then pick up your feet and go to work one day and then get up and do it again. You know, it's okay to cry. It's okay to melt, but not for very long, because you gotta take that deep breath and charge back in there. And I think that's what's hard. I think Tammy and I both would say that if we had burst into tears, I don't know how we would have stopped crying. So we just kept going. And then very much, you know, depend on your friends. There was a core of us, me and Tammy and Donna Jordan, at the Mobile Baykeeper office, and then also Bethany Kraft, who was with Alabama Coastal Foundation at the time, and you know, and this and more and others, and we kept on. We leaned on each other. I think people said Tammy and I would never be farther than a shoulder away from each other, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And I know that I'm stronger and smarter. And mostly I know how to talk live on CNN. Please, no, I hope I never need to again. But it's just one day at a time, and let people help you, because people want to help. Find them a job.
Casi, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your work at Baykeeper for, what is that, 22 years now?
22 years. And thank you for your work at Baykeeper, Stephanie Christensen, Francisco.
Thank you so much, and thanks for joining us. And we'll be back actually later this week with another video with Amy Hunter from the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources to talk a little bit more about the mechanics of the restoration process here in Alabama. Thanks so much.